There's a tall tree deep in the forest, unlike any other. It's a hardwood, like that of a maple or a birch, with a thick trunk covered in coarse bark, from which sprout long, slender limbs, adorning hundreds of leaves that seemingly want to shimmer in the breeze of a cool summer day. However, this tree is not a maple or a birch or any other known species of tree or shrubbery. Its details and attributes defy definition, and therefore lack an appropriate, coinciding name that makes for a much easier reference than this lengthy description. I have dubbed it a Malice tree. I should say that I have only recently arrived at this label, as for a long while, this ageless construct of timber was a source of pleasure, seclusion, and safety. But the best laid plans and traps often lend no foresight to those for whom they are designed to ensnare. So how could I have possibly have known what I would unleash? What you have to understand about this particular tree is the place where it grew, a grotto deep in the forest behind my home, which always had a way of making me feel better in a manner that I could not explain away with ration and logic alone. I wasn't particularly liked in school. I literally had no friends. I know, what kind of kid has no friends? But I didn't. Kids call me names, told me I was less than they were. It would have been nice to run home and feel safe behind those closed doors, but the abuse followed me like a stray dog. My dad drinks, and my mom abuses prescription drugs. More times than not, I'd return home after school to a mother passed out on the couch and a father more inclined to beat and scream at his family than to take care of them. The winters here are remarkably mild, and rain is an infrequent event as well, so more days than not, I spent my free time in the woods, headed in any direction away from my home until the distance created between I and it had facilitated a feeling of security. Secure, yes, but a sense of well-being continually eluded me, for days endless in the eyes of a child. But that all changed the day I discovered that tree, unlike any other. I'll never forget that day as long as I live. I'll never forget that day as long as I live. I never thought of myself as a creature of habit, and believed I knew these woods like the back of my hand. But as I progressed east to a point where I had rarely ventured to, I noted what looked like a path that I had never seen before. I assumed that I had overlooked it because of my infrequency in the area, that the overgrowth, low-hanging branches, and thick bramble had obstructed my detection of it. But previous events of concealment and neglect were superseded by the curiosity that burned in me like a fire. The meadow-like opening that sprawled out before me displayed enough enchantment and mystery in its appearance alone to let me know that there was something special about the location I had literally just stumbled upon. The grass that now grew in the open sunlight above rose tall, bright green with life. Rays of light scattered through the canopy's circumference like warm butter through a mesh, cascading to the ground beneath and my skin in its warm embrace, not unlike my most favorite blanket. Smells of juniper, lilac, pine, and more blended together in a barely detectable potpourri that was both delicate and sweet. Small puffs of pollen and dandelion hairs wisped about the air like a barrage of fairies putting on a show just for me. But there was something tall, looming, and so pronounced that it practically grabbed my attention resolutely and almost refused to let it go. The object, of course, was none other than the tree. its bark a dark brown, rigid yet smooth, like petrified wrinkly skin. The earth around it, in a radius of about 5 feet, was barren and devoid of grass. And at the sight of those spindly branches, a single reoccurring thought echoed in my mind without pause. What kind of tree has black leaves? I've seen pictures of various species of flora with dark leaves, some even black, but not like this. These were black, black, like ink, and reflected no sheen. Their flat hue seemed to almost absorb the light that touched the surface, reflecting back none, leaving only a void of blackness in their wake for my eyes to perceive, like small chunks of reality were missing, each in the shape of a leaf. I don't know if my actions were guided or if autonomy was driven by intrigue, but I found myself walking towards it, and the feeling was almost instantly noticeable. It was as if depression, hopelessness, and sorrow were a large boulder laying across my chest, and with each step taken, that literal weight was slowly being lifted. It had been so long that I had felt truly happy that I nearly forgotten what it felt like. It was like impulse, like I knew what I was supposed to do, and I reached out with one trembling hand, placed it upon the bark at chest level. There isn't words to describe the torrent of negativity being flushed from every cell in my body. It was like all the troubles of the world had left me, and the grief no longer remained. The tree was bliss, a bliss that I had never known. Days turned into weeks, and those weeks turned into months. With each turn of the earth, the promise of a new day dawned. With that promise came an oath to agony. The tree was stationary, rooted in place where it grew, and its power was limited to there. This created a necessity for frequent returns to the forest. Changes in season brought with it bleakness that had yet to affect the temperature. The color of green in the woods had yet to change to the oranges and yellows of the fall, but alterations to that cursed tree had begun to arise. Small beads of what almost looked like black sweat began forming on the surface of the bark. It went unnoticed at first, but given enough time, their increasing presence had finally prompted my recognition. Not only that, but with each return, there seemed to be more and more of it, until it nearly threatened to cover the trunk of the tree entirely. The stuff was a matte black substance, much like the leaves of the tree, and although I assumed the substance to adhere to my skin upon placing my palm to the bark, I found myself confused at the contrary. I had seen the bark leak for myself, coinciding with my touch and the relief of my suffering. Finally, I understood. Last week, I got into a pretty bad fight at school. Most parents would care if their child came home with a swollen black eye, but mine didn't. My parents barely batted an eyelash at me. So, I devised a plan, a series of events that I would set into motion, resulting in the alleviation of my despair. So, the following day, I approached the boy who so thoroughly enjoyed making my life as much of a living hell as was in his capacity to do so. Jesse was his name, and there wasn't much of anything good about him, to be reiterated. The kind of future criminal already known for instances and rumors of date rape and burglary and animal cruelty. No one really liked him. The only ones who would associate with him were those who enjoyed the power he commanded while remaining tightly bound, in fear of Jesse's retaliation. But that day, I made sure to approach him alone. Jesse taunted me as I approached him, commenting on the handiwork he had done to my face, a smirk that begged to be wiped clean. I was obliged to help. I implored him with the promise of money. Excuse me. I implored him with the promise of money, a hidden cache I kept deep in the forest. It didn't take much convincing to get him to accompany me alone after that. He claimed agreement in sparing me his malevolent attention upon delivering of my promise. And he may have been telling the truth, but it was too late for him. When Jesse first saw the tree, a look of astonishment at first glance seemed to mimic my own. He looked at me with questioning in his expression, and I told him that which he sought to procure lay within a softball-sized knot hole in the side of the trunk. Eagerly, Jesse ran up to the tree, finding the void that I described to him, and stuck his hand inside, expecting over $100 to meet his touch. But I knew he had no way of avoiding contact with the bark, and when his flesh made contact, a grotesque transformation that I did not expect played out before me, the suddenness of it jarring and paralyzing, leaving me no choice but to watch unflinchingly as, for lack of a better word, Jesse was absorbed into the tree, or at least most of him. Jesse screamed in terror as he desperately tried to pull himself free, a trepidation that increased when he placed his other hand upon the trunk for leverage, only to become further bonded. I heard the sounds of bones breaking, flesh tearing, and violent suction, as if sucking 100 cockroaches through a straw. Jesse's cries of fear had long since turned to those of agony and desperation, and all I could do was laugh. I chuckled to myself, staring on in delight until all that was left of him were a few bloody chunks and a red stain. That's when something happened that I did not expect. The tree was splitting, cracking wide open near to its base. The crevice formed, expanding at both ends. A thick, black fluid began to ooze from the void like a wound, but thicker than blood, pouring to the foot of the tree at its roots. Nearly torn in twain, the cracking noises had ceased. The splitting of the tree stopped, but the black fluid heaped at its base, churned and heaved, expanding upwards at its center. Slowly but efficiently, I watched in shock, unbelieving the image of thick, sap-like forming material. Slowly but efficiently, I watched on in shock, unbelieving the image of thick, sap-like material forming itself into something resembling a humanoid. I began to wonder why I wasn't running, and then I redoubled my efforts to do so. That's when I realized some unseen force was holding me in place. I couldn't even will myself to blink. That's when it spoke to me. This human-shaped mass, completely covered with a sticky black ooze that looked blacker than the most pitch of deep space, dangling strands of the same from every part of its body, leering over me at what must have been at least 6 feet tall, with no facial features at all, and began to speak to me. How it could speak without a mouth was beyond my capacity for understanding, and still is. But then again, much of this is just that, beyond me. But what it said, I already knew. This thing was negativity, evil, as it were, I suppose. The tree, it would drain me of all my bad thoughts and emotions and take them for its own, like a willow seeking and drinking its water. I couldn't explain it, but I knew those beads of black sap were concentrations of negativity and pain. My pain. Jesse was mostly evil, I already knew this, and the little that remained of him was a testament to my assertion. But I could have never expected this concentration of evil and anguish to take on a sentient life of its own. Deciding my bounty of pain was too limited for considerable sustenance, the thing let me go, and I ran all the way home. Now I sit in my room, writing this for anyone who may read it and hopefully share it. I can hear the screams of my parents from beyond the door, shouts that seem to have just now gone silent. I'm not surprised. Whatever monstrosity I've helped to create is alive now, and it needs to feed. It shouldn't come as a shock that the creature would follow the aroma of neglect, abuse, and wickedness to my parents' front doorstep. Honestly, what scares me now is what will happen when the food supply runs short. This is a small community, and a steady supply of the most horrendous individuals imaginable will run dry eventually. I suppose it will then have no choice but to take what it can from the rest of us, because no one is truly all good.